Good evening and welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here tonight. My name is Jessica, and with me is my co host, Kelsey.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you? Was
I'm
it a
doing
Monday for
really
you?
well. Yep.
It's been a Monday around here. We got drizzly weather.
Same, we do too. It's not exactly it's cold too. So
Oh,
cold
yeah.
and rainy. My mud needs hydrating.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Something like the pond in my backyard needs hydrating
Right.
too. Whatever. Well,
Right.
if you're joining us for the first time, um, I am an autism mom, and I've just my son was diagnosed at a late date, and I just decided that this was a something I could do to tell others my story, and hopefully give them some hope that it's not an easy task, but we can all band together and keep going, and also bring awareness to what autism is.
Yep. Um, I'm Kelsey. I'm a registered behavior technician and I am a special education teacher. So I err more on the technical side and I actually work with families and teach those with autism.
And the reason we got connected was because of Kelsey was actually an ABA therapist for us, for my son, when we lived in the same area. We don't now. But she was actually, I mean, ABA therapists, if they come into the home like Kelsey did for us, they become part of your family.
They do.
And you're with us for over 2 years.
Yeah,
I
two
don't
and
know
a
how
half.
you put up with, I don't know how you put up with us.
I love y'all. More like, how'd you put up with me?
Oh, there was no putting up with. Anyway, okay. So tonight, whenever you're listening to this, we're going to go ahead and get into the diagnosis part of autism, which is a lengthy process.
It is a
Um,
lengthy process.
if you are lucky enough to have some signs early, what would those be, Kelsey? I'll let you
Um,
handle that one.
so diagnosing autism is extremely hard. We'll get more into that, but there are some red flags that a friend can notice. Maybe you can notice as a parent.
Mhm.
Maybe even their peer can notice. But some of the red flags would be not being able to respond to their name by a year old, not pointing at objects, or if they do have an object, they're clinging to it.
Mhm.
For example, they're clinging to just Thomas the Train, which is a big one.
Mhm.
Um, they don't play pretend games and they rather be by themselves and they don't interact. It's called joint attention, meaning you and I have joint attention right now because we're going back and forth.
Right.
There's no joint attention, even if there's an object involved, maybe an iPad. Normally, if you're sitting down with another child and they have an iPad, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be like, hey, you see what's going on my iPad? A kid with autism or who might have autism may not do that joint attention. They may not even ask some of those social skills. Um,
Mhm.
some of the other ones, they get really upset about some minor changes. For example, instead of being able to go to brush their teeth, then go to bed. And if you happen to say, hey, we need to eat before we brush or brush and then have something along those lines and your schedule gets slightly changed, you're going to have a meltdown. Now, that's a difference between a tantrum and a meltdown. A
Yeah.
meltdown is where they're unresponsive to you. None of the sensory items are you helping you to have calm him down, or they're not responding to you. That's a meltdown. A tantrum is trying to communicate something with you,
Yeah.
meaning I told you to do something and now you're going to kick and scream, but you're still responding to me. You haven't zoned out.
Right.
Um, so another big one is repeated words. So if I say,
Yeah.
hey, my name is Kelsey, what is your name? And they say, hi, my name is Kelsey. That's another big sign.
Mhm.
But these are just big red flags. Again, autism is a spectrum. So
Yes.
meaning you can go from your child being extremely high functioning, like yours, for
Mhm.
example,
Right.
and you didn't even know until later on,
Right.
or you have the severe side, right before the age of 3.
Right.
What's some of the signs that you've seen, Jess?
Uh, I saw in my first encounter with autism, it was nonverbal. Um, no, by the age of 3, still in diapers, which actually is somewhat not even a big deal.
Mm-mm.
Potty training in boys is difficult. We all know that. Those of us who have boys, um, it's just and then hearing the signs now, I can see where my son, Thomas the Train. One of the first toys we got for my son was Thomas the Train, and he held onto that thing for dear life. And we could not pry it out of his hands unless he was asleep
Right.
almost.
Right.
Let's see. He would echo us really bad. I thought he was deaf at one point in time because he would not respond to his name. It was like the third or fourth time before I could get him to respond. The social skills when they get older is a big thing. You'll notice that they never, like my son always had a problem being in a group and playing together and taking turns.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to, kindergarten was so rough on him. Taking his turn being line leader. He wanted to be line
Right.
leader all the time.
All the time. Yep.
That kind of stuff. So, there's all sorts and like as the saying goes, when you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with
One with
autism.
autism. One.
Yeah. So that's why it's a spectrum disorder and not a specific thing because every autistic person is different in their
Mm-hmm.
own little way, just like we're all
No,
unique.
it is. We're all unique. And talking about unique, I seen a meme the other day, and I hope we posted on our Instagram. I'll give it to you.
Mhm.
By the way, guys, check out our Instagram, My
Yeah.
Spectrum Life, or our Facebook, My Spectrum Life, or Twitter.com, My Spectrum Life 1. If you do, I will give our behind the scenes guy our little meme, but it said the meme the other day, and seeing how unique we are, how unique kids with autism are, is
Mhm.
that they're not different and they're not supposed to be put on something. But what they ended up saying was, hey, they're just a different operating system. And I absolutely love that. How many love Mac? How many love Windows? And they're both different
Oh
operating
yeah.
systems. And then kids with autism are just different
Yeah.
operating systems. So
Yeah.
I just want to share that.
That's a good one. That's something that a lot of people can relate to. And that's, I in one of my first blog posts, I had written some blog posts a couple years back when I was playing around with this idea. One of the things was it's like kind of like they're aliens coming down to Earth and everything else is crazy. So that's what it is. Life is
Exactly.
different. And interpreting their world, for them to interpret the world around them is difficult. But when they
Mhm.
when they let you into their world,
It's a
that
huge honor. It is
that
an
is huge.
honor, such
Yeah.
an honor, because they're and the way I love it is my world is colored and
Mhm.
completely painted so many different colors just because I know these kids with autism and they explain things in such different ways. I'm just like, why didn't I think of that? That's so cool.
Oh, I know. It's great. Sometimes, Curtis will come up with a description of something. I'll be like, it'll totally blow me away.
Yeah.
And
Like,
then the next minute we're back to who knows what. I'll be like,
that's okay.
gotta love them though.
Exactly. Just like we just got off a topic here. My bad.
Oh, no worries.
So speaking of which, so some of these signs. So let's go over again.
Mhm.
Some of the symptoms are, clinging to items too much,
Right.
not being able to be flexible in their schedule,
Mhm.
not responding to their name, or they're repeating everything you're saying and not having joint attention or social skills at
Mhm.
an appropriate page level. Um, with that being said, what happens if you do recognize some of these? What did you do when you did recognize some of this? What was your first step that you ended up doing?
I the first thing I had to do was, I do remember we knew that something was not quite right, and we weren't sure what to do and what it was, and we were kind of stumbling along trying to find our way, not knowing, you don't necessarily know how to ask a pediatrician about that because when they talk about your the little papers that you fill out every time you go to the pediatrician's office. It's like, are they walking? Are they talking? Are they wetting their bed? Are they not? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? all that kind of stuff. And so
Right.
there's not a box to check. Is there social? Are they getting social skills? Are they
Right.
repeating things? So I was kind of at a loss, and we happened to be at our church. We had a retired psychologist who she had a grandson who was Asperger's,
Okay.
and she told us he's he's on the spectrum. You need to get him tested. And so I started researching a little bit about autism, and then I found the differentiation between where my benefits for my insurance company might lie,
Okay.
because there's the autism is a neurological thing, so it
Mm-hmm.
falls under mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to check your mental health benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that. I first had to call the insurance company. I was like, okay, I think my kid has autism. Who do I talk to? And they're like,
Right.
well, I don't know. For a little bit, I got passed around and finally got to the mental health. And then now that was 4 years. No, yeah, it's been 5 years. 4 years ago. So that was just after. So the diagnostic tool that most psychologists will use is called the DSM-5.
Right.
Let me read this here. And I'm getting this off of some papers that I had printed off from psychiatry.org that you had told me about, that gave a little bit of things about. And then this one, the link to some of these is really long, so we'll put that in the show notes. It would be lower thing, but it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and that's where everything comes out of for your autism spectrum disorder diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know, at first that might be a bit of a shock that it's a mental health issue, because there's a lot of bad stigma that goes with
There
mental
is a lot
health,
of bad stigma,
unfortunately. And
unfortunately.
hopefully, though, I think and I hope and pray that the tides are turning with that.
Right.
And the reason it's, a mental health thing is you can't test autism. There's no blood test. There's no x-ray, no X marks the box. We can look and see if, we can't take an x-ray for it. You can't do an MRI.
No.
Not going to tell you. I mean, there's some interesting things that can come up with different types of MRIs. Temple Grandin's one that talks about that in some of her books.
Yes.
She's amazing. Dr. Temple Grandin is a pioneer in the autism field. But it is a mental health issue, and that's where those benefits are going to come into play. And so I had to find a psychologist that was equipped to diagnose.
Okay.
And now you actually found something out the other day that I thought was something brand new to me about who can now diagnose. And this is new information.
Yes.
Who can now diagnose autism?
Yes. So before the DMS-5, if you have our book, A Practical Guide to Autism by Fred R. Volkmar. Yep.
This was a recommendation.
Yep. This, by the way, if anybody has a special ed degree, will end up getting this book. So we study out of this in the state of South Carolina. But speaking of which, they refer to the DMS-4, which was made in 2009, which was what you stated was that a clinical psychologist is the only one that can give you that diagnosis with the DMS-4. Well, in 2013, they updated the DMS-4, and now known as the DMS-5, and what you're talking about. And what it states is that not only can clinical psychologists can do that, but a neurologist now can identify a kid with autism. If they feel comfortable enough and well experienced enough, a pediatrician
Behavioral pediatrician. So there's a difference between pediatrician and behavioral pediatrician.
So your behavioral pediatrician, yes. Thank you for that. But with that being said, I was going with that.
And the psychologist like I went to, or the psychiatrist, correct?
Psychiatrist. A psychiatrist can now too.
Yeah, so there's actually 4 diagnosticians, I think is the word. People that can
Sure.
diagnose. Let's go with that. That can diagnose.
Yep.
And that was totally new to me. But for my insurance, we had insurance through my husband's job at that point in time. They required it to be a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to find a psychologist that was in network that could diagnose, and then start there. And if you have one thing I will tell you, if you have a child that you think is autistic, on the spectrum, or you've already had that diagnosis, be prepared to write
Yep.
and answer a bajillion questions constantly.
So, what type of doctor diagnosed your child?
Mine was a psychologist.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, yep.
And then you'll be asked to fill out tons and tons of forms. And one of the other tips I can throw out there for you is start yourself a binder system and
Mm-hmm.
file every single piece of paper you get from your doctors and your insurance talking about different things, especially if you are in a state that is fortunate to have TEFRA insurance.
Mm-hmm.
You need to make sure you have all your documentation for that. Or if you're fortunate enough, I know this was a hard pill for me to swallow. Yet, I mean, it was just me being, I guess, from pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of a thing going on. But we have qualified for Medicaid, and it's not bad when you have a special needs child to be on Medicaid, because that means they're going to help pay for all of those services. And services are expensive.
They are. It is
Very.
almost what we came up with, almost 60,000 for the life of their childhood. Is what we
Yeah.
came up roughly about, just for all the different services.
I mean, it was like what, $175 every time they came out to the house was what they billed my insurance company, or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it's over $100 that it gets billed per hour, I think.
Wow.
So it's and then of course it just insurance takes whatever off and all that kind of stuff. So, but having a state Medicaid or TEFRA insurance is great. Sometimes there are insurances through your work. Some of the insurance companies that are through employment will cover services for autism. Some will not. Again, you got to check your health, your mental health benefits to find that out. But once you've checked that out, a test is not like, a go in and see the doctor for 15 minutes and get the diagnosis. No. It's not even a 30-minute thing. It's like hours.
Yep.
Our appointment was 4 hours. And it was, we first we were referred to a behavioral pediatrician, and then we went to a, behavioral pediatrician, who then referred us to a psychologist. And it was confusing because in the children's hospital that we were on, it was the same hallway. We just went to a different room than we did last time.
Wow.
So, yeah, and there's a lot of benefits that do come with the diagnosis, and this is the time where you definitely want that label.
How do you feel about having a label? Because I know there's some stigma to having a label. So how do you feel as a parent? How do you feel? Because as an educator, I think it's the best thing in the world, because now you're getting all these services being able to be paid for and things like that. Now, in the real world, if you're not in the educational setting or you're not getting your therapies, nobody has to know that they have to have that label.
Right.
So how do you feel about that? How do you, coming from a parent point of view, because that's hard, because you want your kid not to be anything wrong with them. You're not saying that having autism is wrong. I'm just saying you don't want to have a label or a
Right.
diagnosis. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So how do you feel
Yeah.
about that?
Um, well, at first, you kind of, it's a relief because then you figure out what's going on. And then you really want to say something because do people really understand it? And it's, you know, my thing came from, I knew I needed that label. I needed to have the label for all of the insurance purposes, and I found out that for thank you, Carol. That for and I think that's Kelsey too. That she's saying that for both of us. We thank you. Um, it was in for medical insurance, but also in the educational world. You have to have that
That
diagnosis
label.
because when you can say, my child is autistic, I have my 14-page diagnostic paperwork, then they have to test you and write it up in your IEP. And then it's like, look, I have an IEP. You need to
Exactly.
follow it. So
Exactly.
I haven't, because of the extreme differences in social interaction. Um, it's always been beneficial. I when I come into groups, like I will take the leader of the group aside and say, hey, because it's not fair to say, a youth group leader to say just drop your kid off and not say
Here,
anything
have
about
fun.
the child. Yeah, and then they act out. They're like, "What is going on?"
What was this?
Um,
All I said was
uh,
hi. What's
yeah,
going on?
yeah. So I
Yeah.
always make sure to take the leader aside and say, "Okay, my child's autistic. These are some of the things that come with him being autistic." Because one of the first things you get, well, he doesn't look autistic. Okay, that's no fun there.
There's
Um,
no fun.
but I want to warn them, and then um, I decided, or my husband and I decided to talk to our son because, as old as he is, he knows he's autistic.
Right.
And so we said, well, what do you feel?
Yeah, having that self-advocacy.
Hmm. He said, well, I want people to know I'm autistic.
I know.
Okay.
And he, from day one, the first day I walked on the house, hi, I'm Curtis and I have autism. Did you know that? Now I did. Thank you.
Hmm.
That was the first time I ever met him. It was awesome. I love it. I
Yeah.
still remember that to that day. I
Mhm.
love it.
It's sometimes he can kind of use it a little bit of a,
Yeah,
uh,
we all do.
yeah, we all use some of our things, anything that we have as crutches.
Yeah.
Um, but I just, and he has really felt the need. If you can see in the background, there the graphic that looks like there's hands reaching towards each other with the puzzle pieces on them.
Mhm.
What that was actually inspired by an artwork that my son did. He came home. He had to do.
Congratulations.
He came home one day and he had to do a picture of his hand. He had to draw around it, and then they were supposed to like draw something inside the hand and help tell something about themselves. Well, for his artwork and I didn't even know he did it until he brought it home. Traced his hand, and then he drew the puzzle pieces
Oh, that's awesome.
and colored them different colors.
That's
And then
awesome.
his little piece said, something you may not know about me is I'm autistic.
I
And he
love it.
explained some things about him. And when he brought that home, I started crying. I mean, it was
And
just one of
I
those,
mean,
okay, and
oh,
for him, he's wanting people to know
right.
it's okay. I'm autistic and I'm proud because it's who I am. You know,
Exactly. It's exactly who they are. You don't change them. You just help them cope
mhm,
with their I hate using the word symptoms, but cope with some of their things that they're struggling with. And that's all
right.
you're doing. You're not changing them. You're just finding ways to cope. The world can change around them instead of them
Mhm,
changing for the world. And I'm a huge believer in that.
mhm.
Speaking of which, with diagnose, getting the diagnosis.
The diagnosis?
Yes. Thank you. I'm struggling. I'm sorry, y'all. I apologize.
It's a Monday for us. It's truly a Monday.
Did you ever come across with the doctor saying no, that he doesn't have it? What do you recommend if you come across a doctor and you know deep down in your heart that this child has autism? What do you suggest in doing?
One of the things that I always make sure and look really deep into, the bios and information that I can find on doctors. You want to make sure that they are an experienced doctor. Not, you know, that being said, my son was diagnosed at a medical university,
Right.
but everything that his behavioral pediatrician that was in residency did, they had to go back and report to the doctor in residence that day. And then that doctor came back in and said, okay, yeah, your doctor said this, this, and this. So we're going to go ahead and do this. So I knew that they were getting that
Right.
checked on that.
Feedback. Right.
Yeah, that feedback. So I knew that was correct. Some of the other, sometimes I guess you just really got to make sure that somebody has a few years under their belt
Mm-hmm.
or really studied at a good place.
Or knows your child with your history a good
Yes,
bit. But you
yes.
definitely want to look in your your doctor's background.
Mhm.
And even though we are not doctors and we can only give you
So
tips and how to get this diagnosis, because we cannot diagnose and you yourself cannot diagnose it. Again, it
no.
has to be that psychologist, that
Mhm.
clinical pediatrician, or your behavior psychologist, anything that's listed in the DMS-5.
Mhm.
Again, go back to our notes
Sorry,
and
that's my dogs.
in our show notes and that link, and it'll tell you who you can. I personally recommend, if you don't agree with it, go get a second opinion.
Oh, yeah,
Definitely go get a second opinion and find the one
definitely.
that eventually gets it, so your kid doesn't suffer. Until I had a one of my mom's friends, she didn't get her daughter didn't get diagnosed until after she was 21, and she has
Mhm.
Asperger's. And so she didn't get diagnosed until later, and no
Miss.
one knew. No
Mhm.
one. And so all these years, granted, she's doing phenomenal for herself,
Mhm.
but you could ultimately do a disservice for your own child. With that
Mhm.
being said, you're your child's voice.
Yes.
Advocate for them. If you don't agree with the teacher, advocate with them.
Right.
Talk to them. Get them to get what your child
Oh,
into
yeah.
what they need to do.
Mhm. Well, and, always be the type of parent to, um, if in the doctor's office, your opinion and your feedback, as if they're not asking for your feedback and asking, okay, so how are things going? Um, all of that kind of information, and they're wanting your feedback, go get a second opinion. I would
Mhm.
say go get a second opinion because it is important for them to know what's going on at home. Just
Right.
as, I had to give a lot of extra information to you for the time that, I mean, because of course you didn't live with us, although
Right.
um, um, you were only there at that time of the day. So
Mhm.
after that, to help have that ABA therapy work, and my doctors wanted it too, those hours that you weren't there, what was happening? What was going on? Did you
Right.
find the stigma?
Mhm.
The doctors always wanted, our behavioral pediatricians always had a form for us to fill out. Okay, on
Mhm.
medication, are they doing this, 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 and this? How well are they doing? How are they not doing? Are there any
Mhm.
complaints? What's going on? And they want our input, and we need to be willing to make that input. And you need to be able to work really well with that doctor or psychologist or whatever, to make sure that uh, you can do what's best for your child,
Right.
or what's best for the person you're taking care of. I mean, they may not be,
A
uh,
child, right.
yeah,
One of
but
our question goes, if your child has been diagnosed, what age were they?
mine was 7.
Okay. So in the state of South Carolina, I don't know in any other states because I'm formally trained in the state of South Carolina.
Right.
You could not be labeled with the autism label until age 3,
Mhm,
unless it is so severe enough that you can be labeled.
mhm,
With that being said, you could still get early intervention underneath mental health services and some of your insurances. They
Mhm.
label a certain diagnosis, and I cannot remember me for the life of me today. But it is labeled. And so at age 3, when they get reevaluated, because
Mhm.
you still have to get evaluated every 3 years,
Mhm.
even if it's not an educational diagnosis, you still have to get reevaluated every 3 years. With that being said, at that age 3 mark, they're going to determine which label you will carry or that child will carry.
Mhm.
And it keeps going until age 6. By age 6, when they start school, they should have a proper diagnosis.
Mhm. And that was one of the things that I came up against, um, trying to find some services here in Tennessee. They're like, "Well, if you haven't had your diagnostic, appointment done in the last 2 years, you need to go back and redo that appointment." I'm like, "Well, he didn't grow out of it."
They didn't grow out of it. With
Yeah.
that being said, I know that we're going to get into it more next podcast. There is 2 types of diagnosis. You have
Mhm.
your original medical diagnosis, and then you have an educational diagnosis. With that being said, educational diagnosis, if you get reevaluated every 3 years, you don't have to update your medical, because
Mhm.
the school psychologist uses history in the DMS-5
Mhm.
every 3 years to keep that diagnosis. Just wanted to make that
Yeah,
clear.
and I didn't know about that and how closely that, actually insurance companies will work with the school system until like, I had never seen this, in South Carolina. I hadn't seen it. The, TEFRA wasn't really getting information. They did have a
Mhm,
TEFRA program there, and TEFRA is a nationwide program that states can have, but your state has to opt in. For
mhm.
instance, I now reside in the state of Tennessee. They do not have the TEFRA program. They do not even have the Kate Beckett waiver yet.
Mm,
Still working on that. But they do have their Medicaid program does cover the mental health side of the Medicaid does cover autism services. So I'm covered there.
thank
But
God.
and it's a state to state thing.
It
So
is a
you
state
do
to
have
state.
to check.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's gonna require a lot of time on, as my husband likes to call it, ignore, where you get to listen to the lovely elevator music for forever.
Forever.
Yeah, he
But
calls.
with that being said, the same website that we gave to you in our show notes from the psychiatry,
Mhm.
it also tells you how often you have to your frequent asked questions. Again, our show notes are on myspectrumlife.com. If you search that website, it should tell you in what state and how what and kind of give you more of the parameters each
Mhm.
state offers,
Yeah.
and be able to help you out a little bit more than we can.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and,
I am
I we're just a little podcast right now. There's no employees. There's just the 2 of us, so you're gonna have to do some more okay, 3, 'cause I do have my producer husband back there. I'll give him some credit.
He is doing
Um,
all these awesome tags that you see come up with the teal and just
yes.
everything like this. So he
Yeah,
does a
it's a
lot
good
of
thing.
work behind the scenes.
It's a good thing we don't have to worry about that kind of stuff when we get in
Thank God, because
trouble.
I don't think it would be where it's at right now.
Yeah. Anyway, so, we can provide you with some websites and things to look at, but
Hmm.
we don't have enough manpower at this point in time to, list everything
Right.
for all 50 states. So, but it's a little bit of a job to try to find out that information for each state, and I'm doing the best I can for, what I'm having to do here in Tennessee. Um, it even though, seems to be a little bit more, well, finding the autism community, and after you get that medical diagnosis and you're checking into your insurance, you have to go back to them and check what services that they will cover,
Right.
um, whether they cover ABA, whether they cover, occupational therapy, for sensory processing disorder. That's something that plays into a lot with autism. That and the occupational therapy, not quite sure exactly sometimes where that's gonna lie, so you really
Yep.
have to talk to your insurance company. When you're with, a state or government plan, yeah, that, with, I don't know if it's this well, yeah, Tefra was government, but the state paid it out, so, same thing anyway. I had to go through that step process. Um, they do cover your occupational therapy. Um, Before we were able to get on Tefra in South Carolina, we were paying for OT out of our pocket. We had no benefits for that. Um,
Mm-mm.
of course, there was they only allowed a certain amount
Mhm.
to be billed to you, but it was almost, I wanna say it was like $65 every time we went in for 1 hour, and we were going in
Built
twice a
up.
week. So that's just one of the
Mm-mm.
therapies he required
That's
was
$130 a week.
yeah,
Hmm. That's a
um,
light bill.
yeah, that is a light bill compared to all the stuff. Um,
Mm.
it's and I know it's difficult sometimes if you don't know that those other, state programs are available to you, especially if you have a special
Right.
needs, child.
Well, once
Um
you do get your diagnosis, even if you go into getting and let's say you checked out your mental health benefits and you turn around, you went with the DMS-5, you went and got everything checked off, and they say, "Hey," insurance goes, "Yeah, we'll pay for ABA, OT, and PT." Even those 3 are still gonna have to have their own evaluations done. So you're gonna have
yes,
to sit there and go again through some
to
of
a
these
lengthy
evaluations,
yep,
eliminating what they know, what they don't know, and where they're at to
mm,
be able to help them out. So it's even
yep.
then, once you even get the that's just the tip of the iceberg. You
Oh, yeah.
still have it all the way
Oh,
down.
there's yeah, it's a lengthy process, and so
The
that's why I
never
say
end. It's a
keep a
journey.
binder.
It's a journey big
Yes,
time.
it
And
is.
you do wanna keep a binder. I've seen that binder multiple times, and I think it's the coolest thing. I've actually shared it with some of my, teachers. I've actually shared it with some of my other parents, and I'm like, "This is the best thing." I know for IEPs, like, a lot of times you have
Mhm,
IEPs. Go ahead and label what school term it is. Put it in
mhm,
there. Get every Medicaid form that you have, put it
yep,
in there. I've seen it, and it's so organized, and so when you do have to switch states or you have to switch
mhm,
or, "Hey, I have a history of this and this and this," you automatically have that document right then and there, and
yep,
it's organized.
mhm.
I think that was the coolest idea that you ever came up with,
I
by the
actually
way.
got that that's actually not my idea. A friend of mine, she had, her kids had, educational plans, and she said, "Hey, get yourself a binder and put all that information together because, you need to keep everything going with the
It
school."
helps
And I
teachers,
thought, "You
man,
know what?
big time.
I'm gonna put school, I'm gonna put everything in any blah, everything there." So, um, yeah, it's also intimidating. I found
It
out that when
is.
I take my big old bag of binders and I thunk it down on the floor beside me in an IEP meeting, they knew I meant business.
They do, and teachers, to be honest, and as ugly as the truth it is, being on the teacher side, I treated all my parents with the same, but some teachers ultimately give you more respect just because you know the jargon, the terminology,
Mhm,
and you kept your records all in order, and it's just like,
mhm,
"Really? You couldn't done this with somebody who didn't?" But they do.
mhm.
It makes a different team, it makes a different, dynamic within the
Right.
team at the school. Mhm.
Well, and then it knows I guess I not only that they know that you mean business,
Yeah.
that you are there for your child. You're not gonna let anything slip through the cracks.
Nope,
And that's what advocacy is all about.
it is. Now, would you ever, kinda go and thinking outside the box here with you? We're talking about self-advocacy and diagnosis. Would you ever teach Curtis how to use that binder so he can take it eventually one day and advocate for himself?
Maybe, but we're still not, figuring out how to put the dirty clothes in the dirty clothes hamper, so
Would you
that day's
recommend it for somebody who's 16, 17, 18, maybe?
yeah, if they're older and they do, and they have learned I mean, one of the skills that, my son lacks is what's called executive functioning skills.
Yep.
And those are those organizational skills and some more things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're still working on those, but if the executive functioning skills of, an older child is getting to where they can understand where to look in that binder for certain things, I would say go for it, because once they turn 18 and they want to move out or they go to college, they're going to have to see doctors up there. They're going to need to have that information. And so if they have that binder with all the information,
Mm-hmm.
what if, for instance, I'm in Tennessee and Curtis decides to go to a college out of state? Well, hopefully by that time he can have a copy. I'll give him a copy. I would not give him
The
hard
original.
originals.
Don't give the originals.
Don't ever make sure you have a copy.
Always.
Yeah, a duplicate, triplicate sometimes is required. But have those, and let them teach them how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really don't want to have to follow him around to every appointment for the rest of his life. He can function. I'm fortunate to have a high functioning. I know there are those out there who have much lower functioning, and they will have to be with their child continually, until such day comes as they have to put them in a home. Sad as that may be, or with other relatives, but I don't have to worry about that quite yet. So
that's good.
I'm not
enjoy
gonna
it while it lasts. And
yes. Hey,
yep.
We're only in 6th grade.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good tip. I tell my parents all the time, even after you get this diagnosis, because even though I'm not a parent and you are, and you've actually walked this journey, I see it all the time. I have to help parents understand their own diagnosis, understand their diagnosis of their child, and just like say it's not the end of the world. It's okay, and just kind of cope and help them see the positives of it. With that being said, I always tell my parents, enjoy this while this lasts. Enjoy them while they're talking. Enjoying, as we said, once you've entered their world, there's no turning back. It is a journey down, and it's fun. It's an awesome journey. It's fun.
It's not the same journey that everybody else has.
No.
But it's your own unique journey. And that's the great thing about it. And that's why, if you can, go out and get some autism books, and read up on it so you know what to do, or check them out of your library. If purchasing them isn't an option, totally get that. I think my husband wishes I wouldn't have so many things around. But I'm a reader. I love to read. I love my books. But there are many publications and things out there that you can get your hands on. And as always, take everything with a grain of salt.
Yep.
Make sure, there are some out there that will have some interesting ideas. So, make sure it's
age appropriate and community safe.
Yes. And just like, at the end of my diagnostic paperwork, our psychologist gave us a reading list and recommended some, some things to read. And some of them were on parenting and how to discipline your child and things like that. And so I tried getting some of the books from my library, and I got them and I read a few pages and I'm like, this doesn't work for me. This is doesn't fit my lifestyle. So let's find something new. And so I go on to the next one. And that's why we have a world of books, lots of information at our fingertips. So, see what you can find that's going to help you and help you cope and help your child succeed.
Yep.
And it always helps to have
always have what?
Friends that get you and get this journey.
Community is a big thing, and that's what we do. Part of my spectrum life is trying to get that community pulled back in and have those resources that you're talking about. And that's one of our biggest, mainest goals, that what we're doing is trying to provide that. So
yes,
that's really good. Thank you.
Well, what would you say in kind of a brief wrap up for tonight?
I say tonight is read up on your flags of autism if your child has not been diagnosed and you have concerns.
Mhm.
And then the other one is study up on the DMS-5. The DMS-5 is administered by 4 different people, which is your behavior psychologist, or behavior pediatrician, your psychologist, your
Psychiatrist.
your what?
Psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist and neurologist.
Right.
And then if you don't agree with what they say, go get a second opinion because you're an advocate for your child.
Mhm.
How about you?
Make sure that you check your mental health
Benefits.
benefits in your insurance policy because that's where your autism benefits come from. Let's see. Get a binder. Get a few binders. Don't get anything less than 2 inches. I'm just telling you.
Be organized, be organized, be
Guys,
organized.
yes. Make sure you have all of the documentation with you because that way you can just say, "Oh, you want this piece of paper?" Then you can just,
Here
take it
is.
out, "Here, make a copy and bring me back mine," or scan it and send it. That is always helpful. And remember that, part of just the first step is securing that medical
Oh yeah, good job, Karen.
program. Yes. Yeah. Make sure you check your state programs as to whether you're a TEFRA state, Kate Beckett state, or none of the above. TEFRA and Kate Beckett are 2 specific programs in the insurance. The Kate Beckett waiver is a specific waiver for autism or I can't remember the wording on it, but I can get that information up. And TEFRA is a type of insurance that is administered through your state that pays for your autistic, all your services. So check and see if those are available. See what your insurance company, if you have insurance through your employer. If not, you're like me and get to navigate the healthcare.gov, which in and of itself, wow, that can be a nightmare. But keep a positive
Outlook.
outlook. Yeah, it's not. It's always darkest before the dawn. That's how the
It's a
saying goes.
journey.
It's a journey. It's a journey. There's ups and downs, and well, as we say here at My Spectrum Life, with a lot of faith, love, and fidget
toys.
And there's no shortage of fidget toys around here. Right. You can make it. You can. Our next podcast, we are actually going to be coming back next week on March 2nd, talking about educational diagnosis and the IDEA. And there'll be a lot of information there. Elsie will have a lot of that information, and I'll be able to throw in my experience and a lot of things about what to look for per state. So with that, we want to say have a good evening. Thank you, Karen. We appreciate it. Thanks, Chad. We'll see you guys next week at 7 Central, 8 Eastern.
Thank you.
Thanks.